Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first extend a big thank you to the Black Economic Alliance for convening this incredible event and for allowing me to say a few words. I'm witnessing the best and the brightest minds here in America, leaders in business and the law and government and journalism. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you this afternoon. And also I can see in the audience some of my friends from Brooklyn. I knew they would say something. All of you are individuals who know how hard we've had to work, how hard we had to silently fight to be in this seat of power and in this room. We all know how much extra we had to work to overcome barriers and systems that were built to knock us down and to keep us out. And once we got here, through our own grit and our own sweat, and even in some cases our own tears, we started building our own systems to undo the harms of decades of structural racism. But once again, we are facing truly discriminatory challenges to our most fundamental rights and to fairness and equality. DEI is not a threat to traditional values. DEI is a tool to dismantle systemic racism and bias. DEI is not a threat to meritocracy, but a tool to level the playing field in the business community and in the workplace, to ensure that more diverse voices and faces are represented. But malicious groups are using the language of the very civil rights laws that were implemented to shield us from discrimination as the swords to now strike it down. And of course, racist backlash against efforts to uplift and address centuries of inequality for African Americans is nothing new. Our history is replete with examples of pushback against governmental efforts to level the playing field for Black Americans, or at the very least, opposition to removing structural barriers to racial progress. Unfortunately, in far too many cases, it has been effective. There was pushback against efforts to help formerly enslaved Black Americans following the Civil War during the post-Reconstruction period of the 19th century. And as we all know, that led to Jim Crow laws and Black codes that profoundly and violently disadvantaged us well into the 20th century. There was mid-20th century opposition to school desegregation and fair housing laws, expanded poverty programs, and affirmative action policies. It devolved into the resegregation of most public schools and communities and federal and state benign neglect of major urban communities during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The imposition of mass incarceration policies and strategic undermining of Black voting rights in conservative-led states followed it. DEI is basically a crusade against all of that. And there have been at least 10 states that have implemented restrictions on DEI efforts, banning state funds from being used on diversity-based programs and offices, and even banning these offices altogether at universities. And there are at least 19 states that have proposed similar anti-DEI measures. And just a few weeks ago, the House of Representatives' Office of Diversity and Inclusion was officially disbanded for budget reasons. But something tells me that my Congress member, Hakeem Jeffries, when he becomes Speaker, will restore it. And last summer, some of my Republican colleagues, they sent a letter to the largest corporations in the country, warning them that DEI initiatives were unconstitutional. They tried to use the Supreme Court's unfortunate decision on affirmative action as a tool to threaten and intimidate these companies, and basically they said that they would be next. And they have been working hand in hand with other entities to file federal lawsuits all across this country to challenge voluntary DEI programs and policies. The lawsuit to shut down the Fearless Fund is perhaps the most audacious. And as most of you know, the Fearless Fund is a Black woman-owned venture capital firm that has focused on investing in Black businesses. And last year, an organization called the American Alliance for Equal Rights sued the Fearless Fund, claiming that its unnamed clients were discriminated against by the Fearless Fund for potential grants because they were not Black-owned companies. The American Alliance for Equal Rights is attempting to use a law enacted in 1866 to protect newly freed slaves from discrimination as a basis to stop the Fearless Fund from uplifting historically marginalized communities by providing grants, mentorship, and guidance and assistance. And it should come as no surprise that the lawyer behind this lawsuit is the same attorney who was behind the successful effort to undo affirmative action in this country. Using a law to protect newly freed slaves from discrimination as a basis to stop groups from investing in women of color entrepreneurs is not only legally wrong, I would argue, but morally offensive. And it represents the height of hypocrisy. And that is why I, along with my other African American attorney generals across this nation, the 5 of us, Kwame Raoul from Illinois, Keith Ellison from Minnesota, Anthony Brown from Maryland, Andrea Campbell from Massachusetts, and Attorney General Aaron Ford from Nevada, we've decided to strike back, along with our other Democratic colleagues. We filed a brief to urge the Court of Appeals in Florida to reject these regressive and ridiculous efforts. This litigation that was filed by these Republican attorney generals and conservative entities has not only created a climate of fear and intimidation in many of our leading academic institutions, businesses, and philanthropic organizations, it's had a chilling effect on the corporate community and the business community. And it has directly led to the displacement, the firing, the harassment of African American professionals, leading scholars, and other experts in the field of DEI. This includes shutting down offices in service to DEI, even though those programs were perfectly legal, in my opinion. They were voluntary and necessary. Plain and simple, these bad faith attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are limiting opportunities for Black Americans. DEI initiatives create more inclusive workspaces, and they inure to the benefit of all of us in our society. And they reflect, I would argue, the wholeness of our society, the wholeness of our humanity, that all voices are included, that everyone is part of our great democracy, that everyone has a seat at the table of power, that no one is ignored, that no one is left behind, that all of us are represented. And just as this effort to suppress Black advancement is systemic and relentless, it's going to take that same kind of sustained energy to defeat it. And my friends, we cannot divorce ourselves from the attacks on DEI, from the attacks on our democracy as a whole. because they're all inextricably tied. From the attacks on reproductive rights, to the attacks on our environment, voting rights, reapportionment, and the list goes on. They are all tied together. And so I guess the question is, what tangible steps can we take to increase economic mobility and advance progress in the Black community? As they say in church, well, this summit is filled with movers and shakers, and some of the nation's sharpest and most influential legal and business minds. So we can start by ensuring the upholding of the critical state and federal role of enforcing our civil and human rights laws and protecting vulnerable communities from discrimination. And this means preserving existing policies and not allowing bad faith actors to reframe the debate away from the fairness and racial justice objective. We also must clarify the obligations of individuals, employers, and governmental entities under federal, civil, and human rights laws, and continue to collect and make available to the public data proving existing patterns of discrimination and racial disparities. And I want to thank McKinsey for all that they have done. This is essential to promoting better future compliance with federal hate crime and non-discrimination laws. And an effort that my office is continuously trying to do, first using the law both as a sword and as a shield, but also conducting investigations and releasing reports that detail the deep racial disparities in industries like home ownership and access to home financing across New York State. None of us should have to justify our existence in the workplace, in university settings, legal, medical, or scientific fields, and/or in our history books. Or frankly, our fundamental right to equality and justice in this world. But here we are. And so we've got to continue, obviously, to push back. And so I will always remain hopeful. In fact, each and every day that I wake up with the fire in my belly, I wake up drunk on hope, and I don't even drink. So I am hopeful because I hear the voices of the Niagara movement at this gathering. And that was a movement during the turn of the 20th century when Black leadership across various interests joined forces to push back against the racial backlash to the short window of Black opportunity and progress just after the Civil War. And out of that movement emerged the NAACP and other civil and human rights organizations, from the National Urban League to the ACLU, committed to equality and freedom. And they changed the trajectory of American history. And they had much less than all of us in this room. In fact, they had nothing. But what they did have was grit and courage and determination and steel in their backbones, and the life-changing value of self-respect and dignity, and a refusal to go back. And so here we are. And so despite the setbacks and frustration, we're on the right side of history. And as the late, great Maya Angelou said, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Let us not flinch in this moment. Let us work together, and let's remember what is at stake, and let us continue to push back and fight back. God bless you and thank you.